Hi, Haidee. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you help landlords like myself?
Hi, Chris. Yeah, thank you for inviting me here today. So I'm Haidee Watson from Adcock Accounting, a general accountancy practitioner, set up the business in 2005. But over the last 3 to 5 years, I've recognised that there's a lot of people in property who are needing advice, who are not being able to find it within the market at the moment. And I'm talking probably about the smaller investor, and nothing too large, but anybody from sort of 2 to 25 properties are probably not going to be able to afford some of the big accountancy fees, rightly so. So I was looking to help people who were looking to invest in property. They might already have a small portfolio already, but their existing accountant just wasn't able to give them the advice that they needed. So I've started developing my skills over the last 3 years to assist property investors, so that I can advise them on how best to proceed with their business, whether that be buying them personally or in a limited company or a partnership, or them wanting to change. So I'm from a accountancy background. I'm from a small business, so I can speak to people because I run my own business, and we've got a small team here, so it's very personal. Most of the time you get to speak to me directly, and a lot of clients really love that they can pick up the phone and talk to me, and they're going to get the answers that they need.
Awesome. No, brilliant. So, tell me a little bit about landlords have been affected over the recent years by lots of legislative changes. Landlord
Yeah,
bashing, as maybe is being called in the media. How have you
yeah.
helped your landlords stay ahead of the game?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. I think landlords have been unfairly attacked tax-wise, and the changes over the last 4 years that the government have made have really squeezed the profits of the landlords, and then the taxation has increased as well. So you may remember a few years ago, very nicely, that if you're a higher rate taxpayer, you would get the higher rate tax relief on any interest suffered within the loans within the property sector. So that has been squeezed now, that a maximum you could attain is 20%. So higher rate taxpayers were losing out on tax relief there. But I don't think a lot of people realise is that 20% now is given in a tax relief rather than expense can be restricted further. So that can be affected by the property income itself. So the relief can't be more than the profits of the property itself. And also other income can restrict it, etc. So you may not even get 20% of the mortgage interest as relief. So, that really has squeezed landlords' taxation. And landlords are now looking, and investors are looking to see what alternatives are out there. And that's where I come in. So I can help them to realise what those might be, so they can make informed decisions going forward.
And what are you encouraging your landlords to look at in terms of structuring their tax affairs? Anything in particular?
Yeah, so what I ask them is, one of the first things I ask them is, A, how many properties have they got now? And B, how many properties would they like to have? Why do they want that many? Do they want it to be an income stream now? Do they want it to be a pension provision? And do they want other people to benefit from those properties when they're not here anymore? So I actually start with death and work backwards. So I look at what they want in very, very long term, and then what they've got now, so that I can see how we might attain their goals. So it's not a short-term advice that I'm giving lifetime advice, and that makes it very, very different to perhaps what other accountants are asking for with terms of advice. So that will help them a lot.
Wonderful. Always good to start with death in mind. So you deal with landlords on a day-to-day basis, act for a lot of them. What are the common mistakes that you see landlords making on a regular basis?
I think most of the time it's not keeping particularly great records, or they're not recognising things that can actually claim for. And probably the worst thing they can do is do things late. So with the January 31st deadline for self-assessment, so any landlords that own their properties personally will be governed by that. So if you're doing your tax return at the end of January and having to pay it at the end of January, and you're already 3/4 through the next year, there's very little planning that you can do, because we're almost at the next tax year. So my advice would be to do it early, get it into your accountant early. Then you know what you're heading for in January, what tax payments are due. Also, you can think about making any changes and speak to your accountant about, are you looking to invest in more? Are you looking to sell? And what are the capital gains tax rules on those and why you would sell? And also, one of the golden rules is obviously for capital gains tax is never sell 2 properties in 1 year, so that you can make use of annual exemptions. Now, there was talk in the budget, pre-budget, that annual exemptions may be going on second properties, but thankfully they've not looked at capital gains tax at all. So at least we have got that still.
Brilliant. So what kind of questions should landlords be asking of their accountant when looking for an accountant, and how can a good accountant set up the affairs for a landlord?
The critical thing here is you'll know a good accountant if they ask you lots of questions. If accountant is dismissive on what you're saying, is not particularly interested or not asking you enough questions, you probably know that the advice is not going to be that great. So what sort of things should a landlord be expecting to be asked when they're asking an accountant for help? Well, one of the things is how long an investment are they going to be making? What would they like in long term? What would they like to see the property happen to the properties when they're not here anymore? Do they want income from it straight away? Is it almost a pension fund? What other income streams are there within the household? Are other people in the household high rate taxpayers or lower rate taxpayers? How many children are there and how old are those children? Are those children going to become the age of 18 in a few years or in later years that could benefit from some of this property income sooner rather than later? If an accountant is asking these questions, it's probably mean that they either don't understand them to ask them or are not familiar with property investors. And all these questions and the answers from those questions will really help me to determine what advice to give to the client. And each client is different, as you can imagine, and each has different circumstances. And that will determine whether I talk about, doing them individually, as individually owned, or doing the limited company. There is no one size fits all, of course, there never is. But if people have got clear, concise information, they can then make the informed decision.
Wonderful. Yeah, lots to sort of consider and no quick, easy answers. The coronavirus has had, deep impacts to the whole of society, and landlords have had their own challenges and obstacles. How have you helped your landlords over the last 12 months throughout the pandemic?
Yeah, I think obviously for landlords it's been particularly challenging as individuals who have had mortgage holidays, etc. I know landlords could have asked for those, but it's been particularly challenging for landlords because they weren't able to evict anybody within the time, and they've had to deal with that. So I think the stress of landlords has gone up in the last year. However, from a tax point of view, I've yet really to see the results of it because, of course, most of it happened actually right at the beginning of this tax year. So we went into lockdown in March 23rd last year, and obviously the tax year started 2 weeks later. So, in fact, we'll just be seeing in April the real effects of how it's affected landlords. So within COVID, obviously, lots of people have struggled. Other people have been obviously financially supported by the government, but I do believe that landlords have been a little bit forgotten because after all, they're not employed generally and they're not self-employed. Property may be their only income source and they've had no support from the government through any of the schemes available to them. So once again, I do think that landlords have had to take it on the chin with all this tax. The revenue are supporting landlords quite a lot with tax payments, etc. But we are yet to still see the impact of tax as the new tax year starts and we start filing tax returns for last year.
And of course, landlords have faced the eviction ban and not able to regain possession of properties. So again, maybe a double whammy there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't really do too much about that. And I think that's when I'd turn it back to somebody like yourself, Chris, and say you need a really good letting agent, one that does all the prospecting and all the background information on your tenants. I am involved in a lot of property networking, and a lot of the landlords that I know have had really good agents, and they've not had too much problems, and even as high as 95% of people have still managed to pay their rent. I do think, like any business, and like my business, it's about communication. So if you've got a good relationship with your tenants, that really helps, as a good relationship between a landlord and an accountant is really beneficial as well.
Absolutely. With everything, communication and having that rapport normally gets through a lot of the obstacles, whether they be Corona or whatever. Wonderful. And so where can we go to learn more about the services you provide to landlords?
Okay, so on LinkedIn at Haidee Watson, I've got an awful lot of information on there, and you'll see how many other property sectors that I link up with. I'm really keen to speak to as many property investors. I want to help as many as they can, particularly the smaller investor who doesn't really know where to go for advice and is struggling with a mainstream accountant who can't do that. Also, we've got the website. And obviously you can always email me or call me, and we can set up a one-to-one on Zoom or face-to-face, hopefully at some point, and we can just have a chat and to see if we can help you.
Wonderful. Well, we'll put a link to your website and your LinkedIn at the bottom of this, and thank you very much indeed for your time.